Brews Light, episode number 62. We are here with Rebecca Zornow. Am I saying that right?
Zornow.
Zornow. Okay, what is the heritage of that name? Just curious.
Yeah, it's my husband's last name. It's Prussian.
Okay. I thought it might be from the same part of the world. I'm not sure where exactly Prussia and Bohemia are in relation to each other, but I know they're fairly close. So I thought your name sounded like my part of the world. So welcome. And you are in Wisconsin, so you're being hit with snow, I take it.
I am. There's a little bit of snow on the roads. To be honest, it's starting to melt. We've had some rain, and so we've had a lot of ice. Everybody's moving around a little bit carefully through the city, and we're hoping for a couple more snow days here, of course.
Right. Yeah. No, so you went to Lawrence University. Are you still in the Appleton area?
I am. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin, and because Laura and I went to the same undergraduate, I put on my Lawrence pin in honor of
cool. Okay, I don't think I have one. So do you know where I want to call it the paper factory, the paper institute is?
Yes. You're thinking down in the flats?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got married, I think it was at the end of my junior year, and my son was born that year. And we lived in that married student housing right across from and right next to that big gymnasium. So remember, we were young and poor, and I can remember some very chilly walks from the main campus across that big bridge. Not fun in the winter. So anyway, we're down here in Tennessee now, and I love snow, and I thought I would miss the snow and miss winter, and I have not at all. I'm just like oh my gosh, I don't have to put on 15 layers. So nice. So give a little bit of an intro to yourself and your writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very happy to be here. And for those who are new to my work, my name is Rebecca M. Zornow. I write science fiction and fantasy. My 5th book is coming out next month on February 3rd, 2026. And I grew up here in the Fox Cities, Wisconsin, went to Lawrence and thought I would go into museum work after I came back from the Peace Corps, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in Eswatini. And then I felt like this kind of hunger for writing. I have always been a huge reader. I was an English art history double major, and I thought, well, I'll do my English major for myself and art history. That's going to be my profession. But when I left for the Peace Corps, my sister Nicole gave me a journal at dinner a couple nights before I left. And she said, well, you're there, you keep a journal, I'll keep a journal. And when you come back, we will make it into a book. And that was literally the first time I ever considered somebody can just decide to write a book one day. It always felt like something that other people got to go and do. And then I started slowly writing and making the shift to creative writing. I was an editor-in-chief at a magazine for some time, and that really bolstered my editorial chops and started introducing me to the world of publishing. And then in 2021, I made the great leap into independent publishing with my first book, It's Over, It's Eden.
That's great. It's unusual, at least in my experience. Most writers seem to know from the time they're born that they want to write. So I have met a few who start later and didn't really think about it much before, but that's unusual. Now, for those of us who have lived through multiple map changes, can you tell my audience what Eswatini is and where it is?
Yes, it's the Kingdom of Eswatini, and it's in Southern Africa. And it actually, while I was there, the world called it Swaziland, which is like the British word that they used for the territory. And then just a couple of years ago, the king came out and said, world, we will go back to Eswatini. Like, that is what we call this place. Please follow suit. And so it really did have to get changed on the map just a few years ago. It's a landlocked country of about 1 million people, and it shares borders with South Africa and Mozambique.
Okay, very nice. Now, one of the things I was really curious about, I've actually traveled a fair bit, but it's been mainly all over the United States. I've been 48 of the 50 states and Europe, Western Europe. I haven't been to Africa. I got that close to going. My husband was going to take me to see Chris de Burgh. Do you know who he is?
Mm-mm.
He did The Lady in Red, which is probably a bit before your time.
Okay.
It was a huge hit here, and it's the only hit I think he ever had here. But because my husband in college was from Ireland, I happen to know all of Chris de Burgh's songs. He's a fantastic musician, huge in Europe. And he was going to be playing in Johannesburg, but
Mm.
because of my husband's job, we were going to have to go back through a country that he's not allowed to be in, not even in the airport. So we went to Ireland instead. Otherwise, I could say I've been to Africa, but we have an image in the United States. I think most of us know places like Nairobi are cities, but we tend to have an image of Africa as the dirt streets and one-room houses. How accurate or inaccurate was that in your experience where you were?
Yeah, so there are some cities like Cape Town, South Africa, that feel what you might expect if you were traveling in Europe. You know, it's a big city, lots of transportation, even some of those, you know, really beautiful kind of European style architecture from when they were traveling the globe. And then there's very rural areas. And as a Peace Corps volunteer, sometimes Peace Corps volunteers end up in urban spaces, but by and large, they're being placed in rural areas. So the school that I was placed at, I was at a primary school, and we were 17 kilometers from the nearest paved road. So if I wanted to buy a loaf of bread or a jar of peanut butter, it was an hour round trip walk. It was gorgeous. It's lots of mountains and hills in Eswatini. And one of the projects I did was running an art club, and I wrote a grant to take my art club students to this contemporary art gallery in the capital. Big deal. We also saw a rock art site, but for some of the students, it was the very first time that they were traveling in a car. Everybody got car sick on the way home.
I bet that was a fun cleanup job.
Yes.
So did you drive from the village you were in all the way, or did you have to walk part way?
It's different rules. Oh, you mean for the field trip? We arranged for a kumbi, which is the public transportation. Like if you are hopping on a bus or a taxi, the kumbi is the equivalent there. But you can also arrange to have them come directly. So they came to the school. We all woke up very early and gathered one morning. And then me and a few other teachers to act as chaperones, you know, took the kumbi out of the bush and into the.
Okay. And did you tend to see wild animals, lions, elephants? Okay. And they never threatened you if you were out on a walk?
Well, so the largest wildlife, I think the closest elephants came to our school was probably 5 kilometers. Some of the students said that they had seen them walking to school one day, but that was big news. In our area, we didn't typically have elephant herds. These elephants were kind of like traveling, moving through as they were migrating through the country. Crocodiles are still prevalent in the national parks in Eswatini. There are sometimes crocodiles that make their way into our region, where, you know, it's homestead, and then you see another homestead a stone's throw and another homestead. So, you know, you have kids running around, people are herding their cattle. It's not a busy space, but this is where people have run their farms and build their homes. And then there were leopards rumored to be in our area too, but we saw a lot of different kinds of birds. Like I would see marabou stork flying overhead, which are 6-foot tall birds.
Oh, wow.
We saw all kinds of snakes, actually. So the black mamba lives in Eswatini, and that's the most venomous snake, I think, in the world. We also had spitting cobras, different kinds of, I guess, snakes that came after. I know you have chickens. They came after our chickens at school.
Yeah, we had a predator here we had to deal with about 3-4 months ago. That was not fun, finding decapitated chickens every morning. Now, when I was living in the Twin Cities, I taught music lessons there. My major was music at Lawrence. And so I taught music lessons for 32 years. I taught a lot of children of immigrants, especially from Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya. And I did learn that in Nigeria, they all do speak English as a native language, plus their what they call their state language and then their city language. So is it similar in Eswatini, or did you have to learn a new language?
It is similar because Eswatini was a British colony for some time, and even
Okay.
still today in schools, English is seen as the language of instruction, but Siswati is the language that people speak at home. And it's interesting because you have these little, preschool students growing up speaking Siswati with their moms and dads and their gogos and mukulus, grandmas, grandpas,
Mhm.
and then they arrive at school on day one and lessons start in English.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of struggle there between, well, wouldn't it just be easier to teach history in Siswati and maybe, build those English courses side by side if it's the goal that people become bilingual? And there's some tension there. I think that the education system is, constantly like making little changes, making enhancements. It actually was only a few years before I was a Peace Corps volunteer there that they went to universal primary school. So, it's
Okay.
still a very developing school system there.
Okay. Now, you are big into horses, and that struck me, especially your story about introducing your children to horses, because my daughter is about your age, and she did vaulting lessons when she was young and then continued that. And so she's in her 30s doing tricks on horseback. And she also volunteers to help handicapped kids ride horses. And she just had a daughter, so she's been bringing her daughter to the barn since she was probably 2 or 3 months old, if not from the start, and introducing her to the horses. And so I found it very interesting. You hold off till they're 3, like they don't go see a horse at all.
It was definitely a conscious decision. So I started riding horses in about 5th grade. My mother had this great love for horses. I mean, she has a great love for all animals. She was the kid who was taking squirrels and raising them in her closet growing up. But she had a friend from church who had horses, and I guess I was the kid that she thought might have an interest, and I just always got pulled along starting in 5th grade. And then I started doing some competitions, and I got injured quite badly in middle school. So at the barn that we were at, the horse I was saddling pulled back in the cross tie, and it was a surprise. It wasn't a horse that was known for doing this. It might have been, we think maybe there was like something in the girth that got caught. But the hook from the cross ties hit me right here, and it broke this bone here. And I had about 6 or 7 surgeries because then it got infected in addition to kind of restructuring that bone. And then when I think I was in college, and I fell off a horse and I broke my middle finger. And, it's healed well enough, but you still feel a little bit that like, oh, it's just a little bit off. So I also think that I learned wonderful collaboration skills, working with other, girls and women in my barn, leadership skills, learning to communicate in nonverbal ways, I guess being a little bit brave to go over things like jumps, or, be a little bit savvy if you're doing these different classes and you have to do different maneuvers. So I think overall I came out far and ahead because it changed me so much as a person and it made me better. But I did, when I got back from the Peace Corps, I reconnected with my old trainer, and I was actually, we were bartering. I was teaching her some French and she was giving me horse lessons. And then I got pregnant, and it was time to take a little bit of time off. And my mom, she still has a horse and she rides quite often. She does a lot of trail riding. But it was always this question in my mind, like, well, how serious are my kids going to get into horses? It's a big commitment time-wise. I just had these questions. And I took my daughter out a couple of times, and, my son was asking from a very young age when he could go out, like his big sister. And I felt so terrible that I put it off, and the COVID pandemic happened and we were all staying at home.
Hmm.
Well, maybe the right answer is to take those experiences when you have them, because you never know what
Right.
will happen. But Laura, the funniest thing was once things eased up and I took my son out to the barn and he, groomed the horse. He got on, grandma was leading him around, and then he started breaking out in all of these hives.
Oh, no. So he can't go riding, or is there
So
medication?
we're trying to figure out what it is. It might be the barn cats, not necessarily the horse,
Oh,
because we've
okay.
also gone to things like the Midwest Horse Fair and he didn't have any
Hmm.
reaction. But there was quite a lot of wildlife out at the barn, all kinds of sheep and woolly, animals and dogs.
Hmm.
But I think maybe something about the dust or the cats. So we're trying to narrow in
Okay.
to kind of like experimentation with specific animals, figure out, is it the horse or not?
Right. Well, I could really relate to your story. Now, I've never been injured that badly, thank goodness, but you mentioned going to Mackinac Island, and I did get trampled by a horse on Mackinac Island on our band
Oh,
trip. So, and it was, you described, I think you broke your finger when the horse reared and you fell
mhm.
off.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened to me. It was a trail horse. So it should have been very docile, but the couple in front of me, the woman was terrified of horses. And so her husband let her go back to the stable, and my horse tried to follow because that's what it
Oh,
was trained to do. And
mhm.
so, they have the cobblestones on Mackinac, so it slipped, its back leg slipped. And so I'm sitting on a horse at this angle going, should I jump or should I try and stay on so it doesn't roll on me? And then I fell off. And it was quite something. I mean, both legs were just shredded from knee to ankle. And I
Mm.
marched in the parade the next day, amazingly.
Wow.
But I thought it was so cool. I had a horseshoe-shaped scar on my leg, complete with the little cross hatches, for about 2 years. And I thought it was the funniest thing because a horseshoe is lucky and
Yeah.
getting trampled by a horse is not. So I thought, this is the best scar ever. It's so ironic. And then it faded. So only time in my life I've said, I wish the scar had remained. But and then yeah, my sheep, they're very docile, but I did panic one and I got run over, foot to head. So it
Mhm.
is interesting working with larger animals that can hurt you. I mean, even my rabbits can hurt me. So and I've been there with having the IV for a month that you talked about. That happened maybe about 3 years ago, so I could really relate to that. So let's talk about your book. Give a little bit of the blurb, the elevator speech about, am I saying this right? Landsome Roads and Landsome
Mhm.
Ruins. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so Landsome Roads is the story of a reader who's obsessed with her favorite fantasy romance series to the point where she gets in trouble at work due to this deep-rooted obsession. She goes to the library just looking for a book, any book that she can read to take her mind off of this fantasy world that has just captured her for much of her life. And there instead, she meets her fairy book mother, who offers to send her into the world of Landsome Roads to meet the handsome male lead if she agrees to solve a late series plot problem. So it's
Mhm.
very humorous and cozy. It's very much for us fans of reading who always wish that we could go inside the books that we love and just think about, what that would be like to influence the story ourselves.
I found it very, I mean, this is an unusual concept. It's kind of a breaking the fourth wall sort of a thing.
Mhm.
And I can only think of two other stories that have done that. One would be Inkheart. I think I have the series name right. Are you familiar
Yeah,
with that? I
yeah.
love that. I have it in both English and German in hardcover. I love that series. I need to go read it again. And then the other would be, I think, oh, what was it called? It might have been called Author. That sounds like a stupid name. It probably is not the correct name, but it's the story. I don't know if it's actually a movie, but where this man starts hearing somebody narrating his life. So do you remember this?
Oh, yes, it came out some years ago, and it was
Yeah,
an
probably at
adult
least
movie where
15.
like he starts hearing the narrator say, and then he poured his cereal, but little did he know that,
Right.
XYZ.
Yeah. So were you inspired by either of those, or this just kind of was like, I'd love to walk into a book, so you wrote it?
Yeah, well, I had never watched that movie. I watched the Inkheart movie with my kids. I haven't read the series, though. Now that you mention it, that would be a great one for us to read at bedtime. And I think that there are, sometimes books that play with the idea. You'll probably see this influence, though, from Outlander, thinking of somebody, traveling into a place that isn't theirs. Right?
Everybody thinks I copied my books on Outlander, and like you, I had never heard of her before I started writing them. But hey, everybody who loved her books found mine, so she did me a huge benefit. But
it's actually a really common trope in speculative fiction, like sci-fi, fantasy. This kind of like portal idea, or thinking of your Bluebell series, Outlander. It really is a common recurring theme. But the thing that kind of put me on this track was actually the Game of Thrones series, and not really for thematic reasons, though of course that's fantasy, but I was thinking a lot about how fans of the series responded to the last season, to the show ending, and a lot of people had complaints. We saw something happen similarly with Stranger Things, the TV show just ended, and fans had the sense that they thought things should go a certain way. And so when there was this Game of Thrones discourse, I was thinking a lot about the roles that we play when we feel like we've built the series in our brains, even though we're not the writer or the producer. We feel this ownership over us, and we want these outcomes for our characters. And we're genuinely heartbroken when our favorite characters die or don't end up together. And so I was kind of thinking about, well, if I was working on the script for that, what changes would I have made at the end? What was the author, George R. R. Martin's intentions? He's still working on the final 2 books in the series. We're not sure if we'll see those. And then I got this idea for Dottie, who loves this series so much, but actually the 5th book in the series is kind of a dud. It's a bummer. It doesn't end the way that she wants it to end. And so that's why her fairy book mother Sorrel gives her the opportunity, because the series is going into film production and there's a chance to maybe set things right. And so Dottie isn't so connected to her everyday life. She's really living in her head in this fantasy realm. And sometimes you get exactly what you wish for, and you realize maybe that wasn't exactly what you wanted all along either.
Right. I love the concept. Do you have your reading ready?
I do. So we are opening in book 2 of Landsome Ruins, and this is right away in chapter 1. In the dark of my tent, I reached for my shoes on the rug, where I set them before going to sleep. I felt inside one soul for a remnant from my own world, one I'd been trying to keep dry. Sorrel must have expected my need for the matchbox while in the queendom of Landsome. A flick brought life to the dark shadows of my sleeping space, and I lit the burner of my oil lantern. I set the glass hurricane around the flame as it grew, then rubbed my hands to warm them. It was cool, and the lantern did nothing to warm my tent. A straw mat plus the rug kept me off the grass, and 2 blankets kept me covered, but apparently, folk in Landsome didn't need pillows the way I did. It was my 2nd night on the ground, and I'd slept little better than the first. My legs were sore from horseback, and my neck was just as stiff. I stayed wrapped in the blankets as I opened one of the zippered organizers inside my satchel. It was split in 2. One side held a jumble of cosmetics and toiletries, the other ink and sheaths of parchment. I removed those. I had a mind to get organized before camp packed up at the crack of dawn and Queen Elthra rode us hell-bent across the green valleys once again. We'd left Castle Crenada 2 days ago, we being 500 or so soldiers, members of the court, and tradesfolk. Our goal was to travel east to the valley tribes, win them to the Queen's cause, then head north to defeat the dark mage Amadi. It was a journey I had been reluctant to take, but one I had to. Sorrel had seen to that. While my goals sometimes aligned with Queen Elthra's, I had bigger dragons to capture. It was time to build a strategy. I rolled onto my stomach and put the parchment in front of me, extra sheets beneath to smooth the surface of the straw mat. I dipped a gray-veined quill into the bottle of ink and scrawled at the top, "Questions for Sorrel." Why did you send me to Landsome? I wanted to write, "How dare you?" but that seemed a bit much for question 1. Is my cat Ginger okay? Do my parents know I'm missing? Did Sarah rat me out to Ed? Or is time still paused? When will I go home? I had some inkling as to the answers to all my questions so far, but I wouldn't mind some reassurance. See, I didn't entirely trust Sorrel, my fairy book mother. Yes, I believed that she had ripped me from my life in Mayfair and dropped me in a fantasy realm with vague instructions to have fun and, oh yeah, fix the plot ruined by a ghostwriter after author Sherry Whitehorse died. I could even believe in Sorrel as a magical entity. Her powers, wherever she drew them from, were definitely real. I'd experienced them myself. However, did I believe Sorrel would feel any guilt over tricking, testing, or otherwise trapping me in Landsome? No. No, I did not. I doubted Sorrel would ever second guess her decisions, even if they led to the ruin of my life on Earth. Sorrel, the illustrious fairy book mother, said she chose me because I was Landsome Road's biggest fan. Well, it was true, I was absolutely obsessed with the book and TV series. Sorrel also made it clear the honor of kidnapping was reserved for me because I needed to loosen up. I didn't disagree with her overall assessment. I'd been sad back home, more tethered to my books than to real life, miserable at my job as an accountant, probably would be replaced by AI in a couple of years. However, my pathetic arrangement resulted in one big bonus. I'd been thrilled to learn I would meet the handsome hero of Landsome, Sir Ironclaw. Time back home was supposed to remain frozen while I was gone, or was it rather that I'd be transported back home only seconds after I left? Regardless, Sorrel said I'd return to Mayfair when the time was right for me to leave Landsome with not even a minute having passed on Earth. I didn't know how any of this worked, and the FAQ she had given me when I first arrived didn't cut it. What I did know was that I could call Sorrel only twice more. When I did, I wanted to make the most of it, hence the list.
Very nice. Like I said, I love the premise. Now, one thing I was thinking as I was kind of reading this, I don't read a whole lot of fantasy, but I certainly see a lot of fantasy, especially as I work with a lot of authors. Why is it so often set in a medieval theme? I mean, is that almost necessary? It seems like it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessary. And actually, we're seeing a lot changing these days with fantasy set in African inspired settings, seeing fantasy in Asian inspired settings. But, I think for the West thought of what fantasy is, it goes back to Tolkien so often and C.S. Lewis. And, I think that writers from the UK having that different, deeper connection to history in a way that us Americans maybe
Right.
don't have so much. For
Yeah.
us
To
American
us, 150 years is like deep history.
Yes. My family went to France a couple of years ago, and touring these castles and seeing like the worn footholds in these stone stairs, like there's just nothing like it here because while
Right.
if there is something that old, right, it's only 250 years old, or we've torn it down to build something new. And
Right.
so I think that, yeah, a lot of us are really influenced by those British writers.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the military, and so my parents always took us to a lot of historical sites, and that included castles in Germany. It included, well, I guess a bullfight isn't really historical, but we saw a lot of interesting things we wouldn't have otherwise. And then you come to America. Now, I think we went to, I can't believe I have to ask, it's Georgetown is one of the first settlements, right?
Yes.
That's okay. For some reason, that's not sounding right. I'm at that stage of life where I'm starting to forget all the great things I used to know. But someplace like that is more like, 400 years old, maybe. I'd have to check the date. But other than that, right, even Boston, one of the oldest cities, and it's not that old compared to Europe. So you write some other genres too, I think.
Yeah, I do. I write science fiction. And before we talk about that, as you were talking about, these like early American settlements, I was thinking about Rebecca Roanhorse is an
Jamestown.
American
It's Jamestown, not Georgetown.
town.
I knew
Yeah,
that didn't sound right. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on.
no, that's good. But Rebecca Roanhorse is an American author from the Southwest, I believe, and she's a native author. And so she's writing fantasy books set in a different kind of setting than we might think of as well. So my family's descendants of Forest County Potawatomi tribe here in Wisconsin. And it's just so interesting to think about the history of Indigenous people here that we don't know or has been actively erased. And hopefully we'll see more, fantasy set in those spaces. I do write science fiction in addition to fantasy. And I was surprised I had taken the departure into fantasy, but I think I had just finished writing a really long science fiction novel, and I was looking for something that felt lighter and different. So the Landsome Road series, they're a series of novellas, and it just felt like you could, stretch your writer brain in a different way.
Right,
But
right.
my debut novel, It's Eden, is a standalone, and that is about a soldier named Arwen who Earth loses the war against aliens and we're being actively colonized. She makes a run for the Rocky Mountains and she finds a group of people so secluded they don't even know we've been invaded. So that's very like American and sci-fi together, some of my favorite things.
Right. That's I like that crossing genres, and I think that's something that indie publishing has really made more available, that we can get a whole lot more creative, because if that's what you want to write, you don't have to wait for a publisher to say, I think it might make money. You can just go, I'm putting it out. And that brings us to the question, what kind of marketing do you tend to do?
Yeah, I have tried a lot of different things at this point. So my first book came out in 2021, and I focused really heavily on social media for a time because that was what everybody said was, well, if you're querying agents and you want a publisher, they want you to have this social media following. And then what we learned in the book industry is that that doesn't necessarily equal to book sales or to an audience, right? Following somebody for free on a social media platform doesn't mean you're going to show up at a launch party or pre-order their book. And what I've learned since then is to really focus on different types of campaigns at different times. So for instance, the Landsome Roads book came out in September and I did a book tour for the first time. I would always do like a book signing at least once a month or so, but this was the first time I had done a dedicated campaign throughout Wisconsin and Chicago. So I was building a lot of relationships with booksellers. I got to get into a lot of bookstores and meet new readers. It actually ended up being good for social media too, because then you would take all these like cool like photos and videos and have stories to share of the books that like readers are suggesting to you and what they say. But for Landsome Ruins, that comes out next month. And I wasn't crazy about the idea of having maybe Wisconsin winter weather having an impact on the tour. And it just felt like, well, 6 months maybe isn't quite a long enough gap for, planning another tour. So what I've been focused on this is online campaigning. I do quite a bit with ebook sales, and running an ebook sale is a great way to get somebody interested in book one, and then hopefully they read book two or your other series.
Right.
And really thinking about like who might have an audience that would enjoy my books, as opposed to trying to build everything from the ground up.
Right.
I have an author website. It's more like a calling card. It's not where readers are gathering. Readers are gathering in Facebook groups around certain book types, or a Substack that might share my book. Like they've already kind of orchestrated a readership there. So I'm trying to think in different ways, test different things.
Right. Have you done any blog tours?
No, I've done a fair bit of blogging in my own rights on my sister and I, we run a book coaching firm called Conquer Books, and we've had a blog and a Substack. We used to do YouTube videos, and there would be occasionally times where we would do like a blog swap with another writer or another creative. But no, I haven't done like a orchestrated like blog tour on, hey, these are my books.
Right. I'm curious about that because when I put my first book out, which I think was 2009, I did a blog tour and it was hugely successful. It was a massive success. And so later on, when I published books for other people, 2 or 3 of them, I paid for them to go on a blog tour. nothing. And these were good books. They're good writers. They wrote good blog pieces, all of that. And I was told what works one year just doesn't work the next. You know, people flock to this. And then just like my sheep, you know, I dump the food in, they all rush and the thing's full of food. And I dump it in the other bucket and they all go over there. I'm like, people are the same exact way. I swear. It's hilarious to watch. Not so funny when they don't respond to my blog tour, but I'll try not to be bitter about that. So what exactly do you do as a book coach? That sounded to me like kind of what you're doing in the book itself. You know, she's going in and being a book coach, or how is that different?
Yeah, so we specialize in speculative fiction, so science fiction, fantasy, anything that's set in a space that's like not quite our world. And sometimes writers come to us for a straight edit, you know, hey, I need a developmental edit, which is thinking about the structure, or I need a line edit on this piece. But more often, new writers or writers who are maybe looking to transition genres or want to see a certain kind of growth will come work with us for a period of a few months where we'll do, you know, weekly check-ins and page reviews and talk about our goals. So we started as a book blog, and then we started getting these organic requests around, you know, hey, I'm writing a book. Nicole, Rebecca, I like the books you talk about. Would you read mine? And we became editors. But then we kind of found that there were all these exterior questions that writers have about, well, should you go indie or traditional? Well, you know, should you do a book blog, or, you know, should you try and get a newspaper article about your book? Or, you know, when do you consider these things? Should I make this a series or a standalone? And so it felt more engaging for me to think more holistically and have longer term relationships and conversations. And you know what I'm thinking about, because we made a pretty dedicated shift from blogging to, we were doing YouTube videos at that time, like book reviews and whatnot. And then we shifted to a newsletter. And then we shifted to a Substack. And it's been interesting seeing, you know, now that we've had the internet for a while, we can see how things change. And right now what's really going on is with like Google's kind of AI summary at the top of search results. People are clicking less through to websites where once they would have said, oh, well, this blog or this website has an article on that. Like Google's kind of taking the information, putting it at the top. So I don't know. I feel like other people are seeing this as well, but we've definitely seen it in the last year. People are clicking through less to our actual website. And so I feel like the ball is kind of shifting every few years. There's like a different internet way to get in front of people. And at the end of the day, what convinces a reader that it's a book they want to, you know, get behind. I don't know if you saw in 2022 when they did the congressional hearings with like the, you know, big 5 publishers, where some of them were talking about merging. And so they had like Stephen King and literary agents and publishing CEOs come and talk about like whether or not this would be a monopoly and how books are sold. And so many of these high level experts said, you know, we still don't really understand what makes a book a bestseller.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that sometimes it's hype. One thing I read a long time ago, I have never tried to verify how true it is, but she apparently did. And this was on a writer's blog. And she said, every time you hear the single mom wrote a book and oh my gosh, it became a bestseller, she said every single one she's dug into, it turns out, yeah, it was a single mom whose dad happens to be a major, you know, editor at Penguin or something like that. And so, you know, I don't know if she intended to be cynical, but it did leave me wondering, how much are we just kind of clawing at the wall and we don't happen to have a father who's the CEO of a major publishing company? Of course, that's not going to change how I live my life, but it was an interesting look at what goes on in really a lot of businesses, that there's always more to the story than what we're being told.
Yeah, I think networks definitely have a huge impact. You know, even just growing up, my parents weren't in publishing, so I didn't even know that it was called traditional publishing or independent publishing. But I'm part of a literary club here in Wisconsin called the Wednesday Club. And each year we have a theme of books that we'll build a book list and we'll read through. Last year's theme was Vietnam in honor of the 50th anniversary of the American-Vietnam War. And this year's theme is contemporary award winners.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it's been a great theme to read through some really wonderful books. But at the beginning of our club season, we had an author come and speak about what does it mean to be award winner, you know, all of these things. And she gave the most interesting talk because she dug into the history of these different authors that we were coming to as, whoa, this is the gold standard. They won award, right? And she said there was one author on our list who she was working on this book for 10 years. And now she doesn't know this author, but as a writer herself, she kind of guessed that for most of that time, that author probably felt like she was spinning her wheels or felt like a failure. Or so many of the authors had, you know, 4 or 5 books out, and it was their 6th or their 7th book that won the award. And how in those cases too, you know, maybe in those early books, they didn't know, were they going to have the standing to get another book deal? Was this the path that they should pursue? And there's just so much uncertainty. And it really is like that long-term perseverance that like gives you the opportunity for a different level of success.
Right. Well, you know, and I guess my books did very well when I was spending 18 hours a day writing and marketing and taking care of the kids. And I burned out. And so I do what I can now that the kids are grown and gone. I have the sheep, and believe me, they yell at me very loudly if I'm not on time with their food. So I don't mess with them, especially Crinkles the Bold. She'll get really mad at me. This is just a total side note, but it's hilarious. Crinkles is a you, and she's got this big, deep voice, and she's like, get over here. And then this Ram, he is so beautiful. He's a St. Croix. He's all white, this big white beard and beautiful curled horns. And he says, nah, nah. We're always like, come on, Ramses, man up. So we have fun with that. We get a kick out of it. So what is next for you?
So after the launch of Landsome Ruins, I'll be announcing shortly book 3, Landsome Roses, is going to come out this fall, 2026. And then I'm doing some late stage edits on a long science fiction story. I have book 1 ready to go to beta readers, and it's about a woman in galactic politics. And then I get to start drafting a story that's going to be set in Southern Africa. I think it's going to be historical fiction, so I'm very excited about that too.
That's great. We don't get a whole lot of historical fiction set in Africa from American writers.
Yeah.
So I think it's, we don't tend to learn African history in school the way we learn Western European history. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, people can find me at RebeccaMZornow.com. And if they sign up for my newsletter there, they'll get a free short story about a paleontologist excavating a newly discovered planet. And I also do monthly giveaways in my newsletter, signed books by authors that I've read and loved recently, and other goodies. And then people can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
All under Rebecca Zornow?
Yep, Rebecca M. Zornow, or author Rebecca M. Zornow.
Okay, great. So you can find me at booksandbrews.net. We have both the Books and Brews Light series and the full series, where we match 3 cocktails to 3 readings. And we can only do that once a month, both because I only have about an hour I can upload to Libsyn each month, but also it gets to be very expensive and time consuming. Having to buy alcohol for cocktails, it's a lot of fun though. You can find me and my books at laurabosica.com. You can find our sponsor, Gabriel's Horn Press, at gabrielshornpress.com. And you can see Crinkles the Bold and Ramses and all the other sheep and chickens and rabbits at glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com. So coming up next, actually this one I haven't edited yet, but it will come out before yours. This was a very interesting interview with a couple from, I believe they're in South Africa, and they are prophets, Petrus and Kajal Veermak. I hope I'm saying their names right. And he just put out a very thick book on the rapture and the tribulation. So whether you believe it or not, I think it's a fascinating subject. And coming up next on Books and Brews is Christiana Scarpino on her memoirs on surviving a terrorist bombing. And I think it's 2 months after that, I think in March, we're actually having an author who wrote a memoir from her time in Africa. And so that one will probably be interesting to you. And she actually sent us a list of beers to go with her readings. So I have to get online and see if I can order those and find them somewhere that they can ship us to them. Because I guarantee I'm not finding those in our local store. So of course, our local store, we're in a town of about, I don't know, 4,000. Actually, we're not that small, but we're hardly big. So anyway, it has been wonderful talking to you. I wish we could have talked more about Lawrence. I know it's changed a lot since I was there, but it was fun to hear about your books. And so thank you for being on Books and Brews. Cheers.